Daunte Wright was fatally shot during a traffic stop. This was supposedly after a Minnesota police officer shouted taser, but fired a handgun instead. And look, I have not watched the video of this because honestly, since I had a conversation with several people last summer, and I've started to realize that I don't need to watch this stuff anymore. It's kind of the same with the George Floyd trial that's going on right now. I have been somewhat reading some bits of news on it every now and then, but I'm not really following it. And I think mainly straight up about it. I don't think it's going to go any differently than any of these other trials like this that we've seen. The cops tend to get off, and even if they don't get off, it doesn't bring back his life or what's going to happen. I just feel very weird about it, I will say. But with this happening, this happened Sunday afternoon. A lot of people obviously are outraged over this. It's happening again, as I said, in Minneapolis, same city where George Floyd was murdered at the hands of police. As I said, yes, this was a Minnesota police officer who shouted taser but fired a handgun instead. Daunte Wright was being pulled over allegedly because of an outstanding warrant. And I would like to be clear with everybody about this. People can have outstanding warrants, and it does not mean that they've done something wrong. I once personally, it's the first time I'm actually talking about this publicly. I think I've told Bryan this story. I once had an outstanding warrant, which really ties back to a cop being racist and not wanting to move out of a parking spot. And I honked to move him out of a parking spot. So he wrote me a noise complaint ticket. Yes, this actually happened. I forgot about the ticket. And then there was a warrant out for my arrest, and I was pulled over. And I was actually had to end up spending the night in jail because of this, which was ridiculous. So things like this happen for the people who've done nothing wrong at all whatsoever. A lot of people tend to run and say, oh, this person's a criminal, and we don't need to do that. But this has gone on, and people are outraged, and people have taken to the streets. Because quite frankly, we've talked about this on the podcast before. We saw a lot of people take to the streets last summer. We just said this in the last episode. And I think it's fair to question, all right, what has happened? Have things gotten better? Have people really stepped up to stop systemic racism? Or is a lot of the stuff that we've seen from companies, corporations, been performative? And I think it's very fair to question that. And what we then saw following this, the time of recording this on Monday evening, was the teams in Minnesota, the Minnesota Twins, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Minnesota Wild of the NHL all postponed their games that they were going to play that evening and decided to not play them. And we've seen teams do this. We saw this happen in the bubble, NBA bubble last year with the Bucks doing it, but it was kind of the Bucks leading the charge to say, we're not going to do this. Now it seems like teams are just stepping up, or leagues are approving this and coming out and saying, hey, this has happened. We're not doing this no more. And in some part, it feels like this could be one of these steps in the right directions. And we don't know all the details of how this is going down. Maybe there are players on this team going to the leagues and saying, like, look, we need this to happen. We're putting the pressure on ownership. We're putting pressure on these leagues to make this happen. And if so, and these leagues are reacting, that's a good thing. But I think a lot of it is kind of the same thing I spoke about last week. A lot of it is what happens after this. Is there more that's going to come out of this? Is there more pressure that's going to be put on? Sports is leading the forefront. We saw this in the bubble for the WNBA and the NBA in terms of social activism, but it's really what happens next. But with all this happening, what was disappointing was some stuff that I saw surrounding the reporting of this. Now, John Heyman of CBS reported earlier today, earlier today at the time of recording this, that he wrote that the Twins-Red Sox game in the MLB was postponed due to curfew and potential for riots. Now, the reason this was problematic was the fact that the Minnesota Twins then put out a statement, and it did not align in any way with what John Heyman reported. And this seems to be one of those situations where somebody wanted to report to be the first person, but not necessarily get it right. So I want to read the Minnesota Twins statement, because what the Minnesota Twins said was, out of respect for the tragic events that occurred yesterday in Brooklyn Center in Minneapolis, and following the additional details in this evolving situation, the Twins have decided it's in the best interest of our fans, staff, players, and community to not play today's game. The decision was made by the Minnesota Twins after consultation with the Major League Baseball and local and state officials. Information regarding the rescheduling of today's game and corresponding ticket details will be released near the future. Minnesota Twins organization extends its sympathies to the family of Daunte Wright. Now, people are upset at Jon Heyman, and I think rightfully so, because there was no mention by the Twins or MLB talking about curfew or potential riots. Like, none of that was mentioned at all whatsoever. But they weren't the only people that got it wrong, because the Associated Press did the same thing. They also, maybe piggybacking off of some of the reporting that I was reporting in quotes, that Jon Heyman did here, they did the same thing and mentioned that. And so it's interesting that you're getting this link when there's anger, and justifiably so, from the Black community,
right?
That the immediate response is that, oh, well, there's going to be riots. When only thing we've seen following this is peaceful protests and demonstrations following this. And it just always seems, and I'm speaking on this for a Black person, is that when we are angry about these things, when we're continuously angry, our anger has to either be suppressed or put in this extremely violent light when nobody even said that. Now, Jon Heyman doubled down on this and said that this is what he heard, this is what he was told. But I'm like, yeah, but that's not what the Twins put out. So it doesn't look good for you. The fact that he was doubling down on this and not understanding the anger, and I saw other Black journalists call him out for this, is absolutely disappointing. And it really shows you in this regard, B, that we still have a long way to go on this. Like, teams just coming out and suspending games and people still getting the information right, or people still trying to diminish the Black anger here. And I don't know all the details of the shooting. I'm not saying that, but here's the thing. Another unarmed Black man has been shot. And somebody, at least police officer, appears to have mistakenly shot him with a gun instead of a taser. And I think it's fair to question, if you shot him with a gun instead of the taser and you don't know the difference between the two in your hand, I'm not sure you should necessarily be working as a police officer. That much I can say. I don't care to watch that footage, right? And I don't feel like I need to watch it to be informed as a Black person in America anymore. We're sick of this. Yeah. This has happened over and over. We know what this deal is. We know the mindset of the cops. We know the perceptions towards us. And we know, and I know as a Black man how it feels to be pulled over. And this young man called his mother because he probably was fearing for his life, and his girlfriend was in the seat next to him. Like, we're disgusted. So for all that to happen, Jon Heyman and people seeing these teams take these protests, be better in your language around it. You don't have to say that. This isn't, if the Minnesota Twins did this, and I know I'm being long-winded on this, but if the Minnesota Twins cancel this game, or any other team, whether it was the Timberwolves, whether it was the Wild, because they were fear of the protest more than the disgust of the fact that another unarmed Black man was killed, then I think it's pretty clear to see where the problem lies there. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and obviously the point you make about, like, where does this sort of lead to is probably one of the more important things, because we obviously had a nationwide, we've joked about this and we've talked about this in this podcast, a nationwide quote unquote racial awakening last year. And I use that term we very loosely, because a lot of people, I'm sure Dexter making a face right now that's kind of
I'm just saying that we did it. And I'm just saying we call it what our man Dave Sims said. It was the summer of white tears. Like, that's exactly what it was. Like, let's just call it what it is, because and I don't mean that against all white people, but there clearly wasn't enough of action. And I'm gonna look at the camera again. I know there's enough with companies and stuff not caring and valuing Black employees or valuing Black people, period, or actually wanting to do the work. Yeah. Like, a lot of people said they want to do the work, but they haven't done the work. Go ahead, B.
Yeah, and the only thing I will say is that, like, the steps that were taken, the good steps that we've talked about, like, those things are necessary, but there still needs to be more that comes from it. So we'll see what happens from here on. Like, canceling games is one thing, but again, like, this is not on sports to fix society's problems. More has to be done within the legal system. More needs to be done, evidently, in the state of Minnesota, because this happened a year after George Floyd.